I think what that approach demonstrated to me was that consumers are actually deeply concerned about their health. I think they are looking for natural, whole foods, minimally processed. So for us, that whilst we probably won't see the same approach in Australia because of the way our politics tends to be more in the middle. What we have done though is engage very proactively with the national health guidelines, and the way in which red meat is positioned is increasingly improving. I think we were, probably wasn't that long ago, we felt a lot of pressure about to reduce red meat consumption. I think that's really changed as a lot of those global reports combine red meat, processed meats, fermented foods, heavily processed, all in the one bucket. When you actually separate that out and you look at minimally processed products, red meat actually shines and its importance in the role of a healthy and nutritious diet. So all the science really supports us, and we are really leaning into how we do a much better job of engaging consumers directly, as well as underpinning what we say, absolutely backed up by data and evidence and sound science. Now that science doesn't always get a headline, and quite often is ignored. So we're thinking about this differently. Traditionally we would use GPs, nutritionists, and dietitians. Now we're using influencers, but still making sure that the messages that they're delivering on our behalf are highly credible.
Just going on from there, do we perceive, or does the public perceive, chicken or white meat as healthy as they do red meat? And does the MLA, do you promote chicken?
So we don't cover chicken at all. We see chicken and pork as competitors, absolutely, and we approach that in a competitive landscape. So chicken have done a very good job as positioning themselves as a source of protein. The challenge for them is they've also positioned themselves as the most affordable protein. So we can't compete with them on price. What we can compete on is the versatility and the nutrient density and diversity of our product as well. I think we have also a stronger story to tell about our production system, much more natural-based production system, really extensive systems, which is really difficult for those highly intensive businesses to compete with. So it's more about how do we do a better job of telling our story and getting on the front foot in that space. And certainly just from a nutrition perspective and part of a balanced diet, red meat is regaining some lost ground, actually.
What impact do you see that the Bowen Genetics data and research that they've done, do you see that impacting the Australian market, the potential for a test to be developed that you can use on DNA from a live animal? How do you see that being used in the Australian or international markets?
So I actually think this would be a good question for a few of the other panellists as well, because I sort of look at the broader direction the industry's going and start looking at how do we do a better job of engaging with what do consumers want? What does that mean for our customers? How does that translate into specifications that we need to meet as an industry? And what are the tools and technologies that are available to us that are going to help us do a better job that also delivers better returns to that supply chain? So then when you look at the effort, the investment and the research that's happening for Bowen Genetics, it's probably, where do you take that next, Steve? Because I think that's probably a really key part of connecting in that broader direction the industry's going, because that is where we're going. We're becoming more outcome focused, and I think there's also opportunities to differentiate within that.
Thanks, Mike. I'd just like to thank Leanne for the question. Leanne was one of the vets that did the biopsies, and thanks for coming along to see what's come to fruition. Also, Ben Gardner did a lot of biopsies in the original days that, and Leanne brought that veterinary practice out. But to probably say where I think we are now is what we'd like to do is, now that Professor Aduli's found these genes that with the test, he's got it highly accurate. It's 99.9%, which he couldn't believe, could you? And re-ran tests and tests and tests, and has got it that accurate all the time. We've got a hereditability factor of 30 to 35%, which is, the highest, or moderately high. And I think we've proven that through our original tests. Professor Aduli had sent back a list that long, and it'd have all these numbers written on it. You go, holy hell, how do we interpret this? But Professor Aduli did that at the end, and that was before the gene testing started. So we identified those animals. Then, because they're all pedigree livestock that we tested, we could go through the pedigrees, and we tried to find sire linkages or female linkages, and we found linkages in the Wagyu breed. We found them in a couple of bulls in the Angus breed, and so in the Hereford breed as well. And we made sure we multiplied them in our herd. And one thing Professor Aduli did say was, I think 18 months ago, he said, gee, you've improved your eating quality traits. And I think that comes back from our original decisions to select those bulls to use down the track. So I'm getting off the track of the original question here, but what we'd really like to do now is, once we get this portable tester on farm, we'd really like to test all our steers, then run them through a feedlot and grass-fed trial and validate it commercially. So then we've got some proof that this works in the commercial world. Once we've got that, I think we've got a product that can be used in many different ways. And probably one of the keys for a stud breeder would be early identification of the animal, and then we can use him throughout our herd or her in an embryo program and get that saturated through the elitist side of your genetics as quickly as you can. Am I answering the question?
Yeah, because I was just interested in, I guess it was really, where do you go from here?
Yeah.
So that's exactly.
So, as Michael pointed out, and anyone that follows the renowned beef analysts of global agri-trends, they've pointed out that there's a significant shortage of the high-end graded meat, and that's exactly what we're looking at, is trying to breed the elitist meat. We can obtain a premium. People who use our genetics can obtain a premium as well. I really think I'm going to rattle on a little bit here, but people would have heard of the GLP-1 obesity drugs made by Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, and they've been so popular in America. But if people are on those obesity drugs, they recommend a high protein diet, and I think there's been a massive increase in beef sales just because of that recommendation. Would that be right, Michael?
Yep, 100%.
Would you have any facts on that, or not really?
The use of Ozempic seems to be off the charts, and no, we're collecting insights on that at the moment, because I guess the theory is exactly what you've said, that as people go on the drug, if they're choosing, it's high quality protein becomes a really important part of it as well, and we're looking to have those insights so we can develop programs around supporting that trend as well. So, I think this whole health and nutrition space will continue to grow in importance in our marketing campaigns going forward as well.
Yep. Probably a couple of other points I've written down here is if we get this test up and running with a portable testing machine, if I was running a feedlot for long fed and short fed, this machine's your drafting gate. Because if you get the AAGG gene in your steers, he's straight into the long fed pen. If you get AG gene, which is heterozygous, put him in the short fed pen. He might marble, but he'll be more inconsistent. Would that be right, Aduli?
He might take longer to marble, that's correct, and he might be inconsistent, yeah.
Yep.
But you're right that if we can actually make that detection very early, then you can make those decisions very quickly. One other thing I need to add to her question, where next in the industry, one of the things that we have gone past is taking biopsies. I can tell you that we went through a lot before we could get animal ethics approval to allow us take biopsies. But now that we've gone past that, it's now just the blood samples where we can get the DNA. It makes it a lot easier, a lot quicker, that we can go straight into just purifying the DNA and then running the qPCR.
Another thought that I had as well was if you're a Wagyu breeder, everyone would know that the Tajima bulls, just say, for instance, Ichishiganami or Mishifuku, they're the high marbling bulls with the culinary traits, but they're often little runty fellas, and they don't have enough weight, they don't have much milk, not much maternal. So you've got the other side of the pedigree of the Wagyu breed, like the Shimanis or the Kikitas or the Totoris have got more growth, more frame, more maternal. If we could find bulls in those lines that have the GGAA genes, well, you're losing absolutely nothing. If we could identify them and you use them, you're losing nothing in your carcass merit at all when you use them straight over your Tajimas. So I think there's a massive advantage of getting way more consistency through the animals that you're going to slaughter.
Taking those animals that test well under this science and then putting them into a long-fed program, wouldn't I be right in saying that, if you take those animals and then feed them on grain for 400 days, you're going to undo a lot of that work? That this testing's been done on grass-fed animals. We go and put them in a 400-day feed pen. Has there been testing done to validate that their omega-3 levels maintain over a long feed program, or to actually end up with a lot of omega-6 in there due to diet? I know Aduli said because they're ruminant, doesn't pass through as quickly, but over 400 days, is there any science to say that it doesn't shift and change and the actual health benefits of diminish?
That's a good question. I have a feeling that you are dealing with DNA, it doesn't change. Consistently, it doesn't change. Compared to, say, adipocytes, I was discussing with someone in the audience about selection based on adipocytes. The thing with adipose tissues is that over time, because a lot of the changes in diets will have direct implications on accumulation of fat. But because this test is based on the DNA of the animal never changes. It's always there. So once you've cracked the genetic code, it means that you can actually track that gene down the generations. So whether you are feeding it for 400 days or not, as long as you're dealing with the same animal, and you still have that potential that that animal can actually pass about 50% of its genetic makeup to the next generation, then you have some consistency there.
Yeah, well done, Steve and Aduli, on and your families on what you've achieved. It's been terrific. I think it's modern beef or modern red meat in my eyes. And my question is to all three of you. So Michael, as an industry, we've chased marbling, and that's been our number one taste factor that we've led, but we haven't chased texture being fat quality, nor have we chased health benefits that you talked about before. As an industry, are you going to support Steve with this and embed it into your thinking? And Stephen Aduli, I'm going to ask you what your thoughts are on what the call to action is in your eyes.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And I think if I just take a step back and look at all of the traits that have been researched heavily to develop the MSA grading program, it has been incredibly diverse. And in the early days of developing the grading system, every factor that could have possibly impacted eating quality was on the table. And they brought it back to a manageable number and of traits, but also recognising the diversity in the real consumer. So our research has been focused on everyday consumers and dealing with the diversity of the consumer and bringing that back to tenderness, juiciness, flavour and overall liking. Now there's a lot in that because texture was part of it. What we found was measuring ultimate pH, marbling, fat thickness, adjusting carcass weight for maturity. We found breed content relationships. Bos indicus related to calprestatin has issues around ageing and tenderness. HGPs, the hang method. So everything that impacted that consumer outcome is part of the grading system. So some of the things we've spoken about today, particularly around flavour and differences in flavour, some of the work that you've done with Aduli in the sheep industry as well, do open up, well, what's left on the table? What do we need to do next? Thinking about the omega-3 enriched beef would be amazing. And as we've heard, the rumen is incredibly complex. So I'm not opposed to testing the boundaries of our current knowledge in R&D, and we should be pushing harder into these areas. I guess it's from our perspective, we work on what are the industry priorities at the time. If we can get this elevated into where we need to go next, we should. And there has been and continues to be a focus on flavour and solving some of the drivers of flavour. I think the texture piece is something that we are light on, and some of the work around melting point of fat is not something that has specifically been tested. And when I look at the MSA grading model, we've tested Wagyu as an independent effect. We've tested grass versus grain systems as an independent effect. What tends to happen through the work that we've done is because a consumer isn't perfect, they're not necessarily picking up Wagyu, but the more marbling, the better eating quality outcome. And that will no doubt be associated with some of the different attributes that are unique to Wagyu. Similarly, with grain-fed versus grass-fed, there's not a distinct difference between grass and grain in the grading model, but there will be things related to tenderness and flavour and juiciness that be associated with the finishing system. So we don't call out necessarily the breed or the production system. The factors in the model currently explain it well enough. Can we get more precision in the model? Yes. Are there more traits we can look at? Absolutely. So, I think we need to explore that further. I think, for me, one of my takeaways from today is to go back and have a look at where are the gaps and what do we need to do, because there's a whole lot of data and evidence that you've done in the sheep side, and now we're seeing in beef that, looks pretty damn interesting, I must say.
Thanks, Tim. But we'd appreciate any help we could get from MLA to help us pursue this. Like we've done this, this research over the last 7 years with Aduli. We haven't had any sponsorship or asked for any sponsorship. There is an innovations program run through the government that is just a higher tax rebate. And if you ask Jody, it's very complicated and maybe questionable whether it's worth pursuing, but we have done so. I think one of the key things that Aduli has discovered is the omega-3. and the importance of the omega-3 long-chain acid, polyunsaturated fats. Because as you can see just on that graph on that board there on the right, on your right, we had a number of heifers that tested way above 30 milligrams per 100 grams. So, that I think that would be a great health thing to promote for beef and encourage more beef consumption if we could test for that and have it labelled when it's being sold.
Just before I hand to
Yep.
Aduli, just there are opportunities to partner on R&D. We have a MLA donor company, which means there's no levies involved, but we can match private investment. And certainly in this area where there's some cutting edge innovation, it's something that we can discuss post this as well. It's a dollar for dollar matching program, so something we should be discussing. Interestingly, around the omega-3, because salmon's always put up as the shining light on omega-3s, but we're finding when hearing from the seafood sector that there's wildly different amounts of omega-3 in farmed salmon compared to wild caught. And so labelling requirements and labelling of these things becomes really, it's a huge opportunity for the beef industry. I can't think at the moment of a supply chain that's making a claim as part of their branding. So I think as you look at individual supply chains and points of difference. So if those claims can be verified, continually backed up, then there's no reason why that can't be a really key point of differentiation in a branded program in the future as well.
I agree with both Michael and Stephen. Whatever little money comes in to support the research will be welcomed. Research is not cheap, it's quite expensive, so whatever help comes in would go a long way. I have a personal dream. Now, I'm not sure whether that dream will be fulfilled in my lifetime, but what I would want to see is people who breed Angus and people who breed Wagyu and those who breed Herefords sort of have a round table to sit down and say, guys, we've got great genetic material here. Is there a way we can develop a breed out of those three? Combine the high marbling, combine the fast growth, combine the genetic makeups that we have in there. Can we blend? Can we forget our societal differences? Can we just say, okay, can we come together and come up with this wonderful product? I think it will be fantastic. The reason why I say this is that, if you look at what Graham Gilmore has done, it wasn't just sitting with the Dorpers. He looked at the Van Rooys, he looked at the Dorpers, he looked at the Texel, looked at the good qualities in each of those breeds and thought, why don't I line breed? There would be skeptics. When you dream, not everybody agrees with you. Like I said, current circumstances, current situations, and having different breed societies, having their own goals, it becomes almost like a competition. My dream is to one day see these guys sit down together and say, okay, Stephen, you've got the environment, you've got the genetics, let's get started.
I'm just wondering, will we get to the stage where we can actually have those come across and sell them as an eating outcome, not because it's just got purely a black paper?
Yeah, look, Peter, I really just putting breed aside for a second, I think that some of the work we're doing around value-based marketing opens up those opportunities, because if we think about who we're doing this for, it's for the consumer ultimately. They're the only people putting money into the supply chain. Everyone else is sharing the consumer dollar along the way. So we have to do a better job of meeting consumer expectations. That will be translated into customer specifications. And I think our brand specs will evolve along those customer lines. I'm convinced that being more outcome focused and objectively measuring quality and yield traits, regardless, and then you choose the breed or combination of breeds to get you there. I also think the investments we're making in multi-breed genetic evaluation will also help that as well, because you start thinking about, if you were today to try and choose the best traits of any breed to put into a crossbreeding program, even though we're measuring the same trait in the same way, they're actually not comparable across breeds today either. So I think our systems haven't evolved to enable that. And we recognise in every breed there is variation. And the good cattle of any breed are really good. And there's a tail, and we need to continue to drive improvement. So we can measure that now, and using the MSA index as a great indicator of the eating quality of the herd. Not only are we measuring premiums, but also the eating quality direction of the herd. And I think we can go a lot faster, a lot further, if we took down some of those barriers and became more outcome focused, because we'll actually be more productive. You think about the hybrid vigour advantages as well. But our system is rewarding breeds and breed-based claims. But I think in the future, how we can go further and faster will be rewarding those who meet those specifications the best.
From a bull buying perspective, in the future, do you see being able to put a figure on this and sort of be added to the EBBs for assistance in buying bulls for the eating quality factors?
Look, that's a good question. I think we're in early days yet, but as we develop, I can see that on pedigrees we could have whether they've got what gene sequence they've got. I can certainly see that happening, and I hope it does, because it's only for enhancing breed development, and we're looking from the consumer backwards. Because like when I started as a kid, and Jodie's the same, we always best one in the show ring or most structurally correct and that type of thing. And don't get me wrong, that structure is imperative, because it's probably more imperative today than ever, because too many people look at the breed plan figures with low accuracy. And don't worry, we do it. We've got to have breed plan figures, and it is some indication, but you've got to use your eyes and your wisdom. It's just an aid, but the breed plan system. But what we've identified is whether they've got a gene to marble, or whether they're heterozygous, or they've got the lesser gene. So they've actually got it, or they haven't, and I think that'll be a valuable tool moving forward in the stud industry for sure.
Do you know if there's any, it's probably too early to tell, but often when you're selecting for a genetic trait, say in the dairy industry, you're chasing for higher production that was also linked to lower fertility. Do you know, are there any early stages of identification of these eating quality traits linked to anything like subfertility or infertility?
So the only way I can answer that question, but Aduli might have another answer, but all the animals we tested were performance animals. We didn't test any run-out runts. We just made sure they ticked all the boxes for structural soundness, the type of cattle you wanted, the performance you wanted. So the best ones in the sale yard that you see and get paid for, they're the ones we did. We didn't make any exception for run-out little Tajamar fellas or anything like that. But I haven't seen any linkage in our short time doing it to any other traits. Like maybe Aduli might have a different answer to that.
No, I think you're correct. In terms of correlations between omega-3s, for instance, and fertility, there's no correlation. Any correlation that would come to fore would have to be hormonally driven. But as at yet, I haven't seen studies where there have been those sorts of correlations. The only thing that comes in, say, with omega-3 beef, for instance, that you have to deal with is probably oxidative stability, in the sense that we see with the feeds. For instance, if you formulate rations, and we run this experiment over a long time, if you have high levels of omega-3 in the feeds, now you can't formulate that diet that will last for more than 4 weeks. because if it does last more than 4 weeks, it begins to get a bit rancid. The rancidity comes in because of the high level of oil that is within that feed. So you could say that, yeah, there is a bit of a negative correlation between the feed quality and the oxidative stability of the omega-3s in the feed. But within the animal itself, we haven't seen that. In the meat, most likely you may have some oxidative stability because you've got lots of unsaturated fatty acids, so they're very easy to break. When they're broken that quickly, you might have to, deal with things like oxidative stability. Shelf life, probably, I'm not too certain. But most of the other correlations we've seen are more to the positive side, in the sense that if you have low fat melting point, well, you have better meat eating quality coming through. You also have more of the unsaturated fatty acids in there. So in a way, that correlation is actually in a positive direction. One other thing that we've seen that is positive is in terms of the marbling as well. There are some positive correlations there with the amounts of, say, oleic acid that you have and the flavor that you get. So understanding the relationships between the traits, yes, I think that's very important, that we have to understand whether the correlation is negative or positive, or there's absolutely no correlation. Those are important things.
Would cooking techniques need to change as steaks get lower melting point fat and all that sort of thing? Because obviously meat eating quality also has a fair bit to do with how you actually cook the steak. Does there need to be more education about how to get the best meat eating quality overall with all the effort you're putting in, plus the actual cooking of the meat?
Andrew, I think Aduli could answer this, but I'll add a little bit. As you can see, I've tried a few over the last few years, and that lady behind you, to your right, will tell you about how much smoke's been on the veranda a few times. But I think there is definitely a different cooking technique to, especially the lower melting point steaks. Aduli, would you like to add?
Yeah, I agree with that. It will be an additional value if there are cooking techniques that actually enhance, the quality of that meat even better. I must just admit that I am not on that side. Like, all the cooking details and techniques is not actually my forte, so I can't comment as to the best cooking method that will actually bring that flavor out. But it will be a good added value thing if the cooking techniques to enhance that can be added. What I do know, like some of the sensory panels that we've run, where we've produced the meat and actually invited both trained and untrained panel members to test it. What we've utilized in grilling the meat is keeping it to a standard of about maybe 70 degrees centigrade. So we put in the probe and make sure that it doesn't go over and beyond that, so that it's not overcooked and it's not undercooked. But people who are dietitians might add more as to the best cooking quality, but we utilize that just as a standard to make sure that we can compare.
I'll make a comment on that, having been around a lot of chefs and dealing with a low melting point product. It cooks a lot faster, so the key is when you have a low melting point, like these guys have got in the 30s, you have to take it off at like 53 degrees and let it sit, because it'll continue to cook. So we had a lot of problems in those early stages of getting a dry feed back, because people would cook it to the regular temperature when you've got a steak or a piece of lamb melting in the 40s. And so it took us a long period of time to realise that we had to leave it as medium rare and then let it sit before slicing. So the same would apply for any of the work that's been done here.
Now, after your 7 years of study and testing and assistance with Aduli and the whole Peake family, what are the key directions that Bowen Stud's going to take now, besides getting your machine to do the testings, beside that?
I think we'll definitely try and multiply the animals that have got these traits. Because we've sacrificed nothing in performance and the type of cattle that we need to breed, like good footed, big muzzled, good uddered. We've sacrificed nothing, and that, I think that's just a winner in itself, that these genes are within that population. So if we can multiply them within our herd, and don't get me wrong, we'll continue to bring outside blood in, and maybe they won't have the right genes from the start, but if we join them to the right females, we can get the outcross in, and hopefully the progeny, we'll get some progeny that are the right way. But I think it's certainly a direction we want to take, and I think, you know, moving into the feedlot sector and the meat end user, and maybe there's bigger things to come of it under a brand, or helping feedlots out with steer selection, segregation, and saving them potentially a lot of money. But I think that we've got a lot to think about, Richard. It's just early days, and we're trying to kick one goal at a time. And yeah, hopefully everything will progress, but we're certainly going to focus on it, that's for sure.
Isobel, after the announcements this week, do you think farmers particularly are at risk of we've obviously got 12 months for everyone to decide what they're doing. Do you think, especially if they've got a little bit of a diverse portfolio, do you think they're at risk of making some hurried decisions, or what's your sort of first off about advice to people in the...
I think people are at risk of making some hurried decisions. People who are strategically planning as a normal course of action in their businesses will handle this better than people who've got so much to sort out, and they'll make isolated decisions that might have other impacts that they haven't thought through. So I think more than ever it's important that people are doing that strategic level of planning in their businesses. It's really important.